In this video, I'll cover how you can use Figaf tool in your SAP PI to Integration Suite migration. What are all the different concepts? How does it all fit together, and how can you simplify the way you're working with this? There's a lot of things that we will be covering, and obviously this does require that you have already installed the Figaf tool. There's a different video that covers the specific area, all the different things that need to be in place. Running Figaf, so go check that out first. We should have a link to it if everything goes out. Otherwise, you can find it on our YouTube account. But let's get started. So, there's actually, when you're starting up on this migration journey, there's a lot of parts where the Figaf tool can simplify the way you're working with your SAP integrations. We covered in this model, you can obviously fit it into whatever engagement model that you're using with the different capabilities and perspective that it has. So it all the way from your planning, creating an assessment of your current landscape, understanding, doing proof of concepts, and I think a lot of this would fall into what you'll be exploring with this tool, trying to do proof of concepts. There is a lot on the migration journey, taking all these into ICOs you have, convert them directly into iFlows with all the content needed. Setting up the DevOps platform, there will be a separate video on the DevOps. It's a much bigger topic, and there's a lot more to cover in it, but that's some great stuff. Obviously, we want to test these things. We want to do some groovy XSLT editing, which also a part of the DevOps tool. You should obviously test this and using it as a way to prove everything worked. You can track the progress of everything that's going on with this, and then you can check live, go lives, what's going on, who have moved things into production, governance framework, and then there's the full DevOps tool that enable you to handle the continuously delivering on the processes. Okay, so let's get started. So the first part here is setup and the assessment. That is some great stuff. So obviously you should have installed the Figaf tool by now. You should have configured agent, and you should have synchronized these agents. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set up our landscape. What is it that we want to be working on for this migration? And there's some components here, both what are the PI systems, what are the CPI systems. We have this thing about landscape improvement. So if you're moving things from QA or production into your dev CPI tenant, it will do a transition from dev SAP to from prod SAP to dev SAP. That means if you're transporting or migrating a PO transport channel where there's an externalized parameter that is called something with prod SAP, it will be replaced by dev SAP. So this just simplifies the journey, making it a lot easier for you to handle such scenarios. And once you have done that, you will get this migration overview that gives you a good way to understand what's going on in your landscape. Okay, let's get started. Good. So we have a Figaf installation running somewhere. So here we have our Figaf installation running. Just a sec. So we will go under here the SAP PI to CPI migration. Yeah, so you will see we're using CPI a lot in this because I guess using CI for continuous integration makes it difficult, and also Integration Suite sometimes makes it a little difficult. We will select our PI systems that we're already connected, and we will select our trial system here. We can press save. So if we had production systems, we should also be able to add them here. We can press save, and now we can go in and we can save some value should be replaced to another. So this would be the way you would continue working with these things. if you, for instance, here have a module that is called EDB replace, you can go in your CPI system and say, okay, we should select this item from a script collection, and then we should process this Groovy script for all these things. That means it's an easy way to replace some existing values and beans, and it will be set up with everything you need to work with. Well, let's just press save. It's not, I don't think we have that in the landscape, so let's see. So now we can see the migration overview that is gone on, and we have all the items in place. So I think one of the first thing is, obviously you can go in and say, okay, hey, we already migrated this specific iFlow to, or this ICO to this. So this is a standard way for you to figure out what has been migrated, what's going on, etc. with these specific scenarios. Okay, so this is the migration overview that gives you this ability to understand. One thing we recently added is this thing about tags, and the thing is, a lot of times when you're working on a migration, you will go and work in phases, phase 1, 2, 3. And the best way to work on that is, in the Figaf tool, is to go in and create a tag that is called then wave 1. So that means you can then go to your tracked objects. Here you will select your PI system, you will go in your ICO here, select for ICOs. And then I think I want to 111. So that means I can now attach a tag to these on an ICO level. And that means that once I go back to my PI to CPI migration overview, we can select the tag, and then we can see only these two that is in this this journey. So that means you should obviously go through all of these, filter them out, and figure out what is in my wave 1. At least wave 1 you should have configured. You can go back and ignore it and say, hey, I don't want to search for anything, and you can obviously also just still search for items in all the different columns with this filter criteria. Okay, so that's the overview, where you can see all these different details on it, and I think there's also the thing about expanding that will show you more. Interface, we showed how to use linking, filtering, adding tags for waves. Good. So one other part of this is understanding your current landscape. What is it that you have in your SAP PI PO system? How are all these things working together, and what can you actually do with it? And that's really crucial to have much more detailed understanding of what's going on. And that's why we started out creating an assessment that will give you all the details that you would need for planning this migration, give you a full overview of all the different artifacts in it. And it is really easy to create at this point in time. Okay, so we have the system up and run. We just click here, click at the test whatever we want here, and here you can select the statistics data. What should we select? Current or last month is the two options that you have. If you are on the first or second, probably you should use last month. If you are towards the end of the month, it makes a good sense just to use the current month as it. And then means that we would have this Excel sheet here with all the different ICOs we have. So it will require effort for you to manage this. So normally I would go through here and go into the view. I would freeze the top row so I can see it, and I would also go in and enable filters so I can filter on these things. It does require effort to go through this because there's a lot of details, and the thing is, some of this is important for different scenarios and different use cases. So here we can see that so we have here an ICO, the number ICO. So here we have one ICO that has 2 receivers. We can see the input, communication channel input, the adapters, sender tags, receiver tab, if it's a BPMN. What are the message mappings involved in it? Here we can see, for instance, mapping challenges. We can see receivers, modules, endpoints. All these things just makes it possible to see how many messages we've processed on this in the last period. We can see that there's some of these that are relevant for BPMNs. So there's a lot of filter criteria, and this makes it really good when you are processing this and understand, so what is it actually we are supposed to be doing on our migration. Put it in pivot tables, filter out sender, adapter, receiver criteria. Just to remember this thing that one sender, so if we just looked at file sender databases, we may have multiple scenarios, because if this sender have multiple receivers, it will be as multiple different ICOs. Just a short observation on it. And we see modules, all these things. We can also see if a communication channel is stopped, then probably if you are fetching this from the productive system, would mean, yeah, this is not really an active integration, which makes it really easy to migrate, because you can just skip it, hopefully. Obviously, you need to check why this is stopped, but if it's stopped, then it would make sense to stop, and it will also show if there's errors on it, etc. There's a lot of details in it. Inactive, stopped. Good. So that's a part of it. The next thing is we have this thing about tagging, and the challenge we found with migration was we had a customer that then were using file SFTP with archive, and that was somehow causing a problem at that point in time. And I was like, okay, how do we actually resolve that in our migration journey, and how do we actually resolve that? Figure out how many channels have this problem. And to do that, so before we were just going through and say, hey, we want to just create a new rule as a part of this thing about problems, but that was not really sustainable and scalable. So instead we came up with this, what we call tagging. Figaf tagging rules, you can search for it. And the idea here is that we are creating a number of tagging rules. And these tagging rules is ways for you to search into your iFlows, all the different contents that you have. So here we will set up what are the PO system, CPI systems we have, and if we just should override them all. So I can obviously go in and process the tagging for all of these, but that would just take too long. So let's just try with some details. If we want to do synchronizations on these or not. So here we do find that there's one iFlow with communication channel or with a command in, and the way this works is we can create an XPath. So we can go in here and we can find a communication channel that is using this specific scenario. We can then test, does it have a pre-process and a string length of more than 0 of the value, then these two should be considered as a problem. And this is then what we have done with all these different scenarios, function line processing. So obviously you should go through all of them, process them, but yeah, it will just take a little while for it to find all the relevant SFTP with archive. We'll take that one also. And sometimes we have created some improvements on these, so we can search for specific adapter type to simplify the operations, specific patterns. All this just makes it easier to work with. That means once we go back here to the migration assessment here and generate the report, and that means you will generate the report multiple different times, so you need to find a way to deal with that. So if we then just go and search for sender type, so enable editing, filter, some modules, we have here sender tags. See, we have this SFTP channel, so now we can find this channel that has an archive problem that we should obviously consider. How do we manage this? And this is just a way to go through, process these things, and then figure out, is this a problem? It may not really be a problem, but just a concern or something like that you want to go and fetch on. Okay, that's the assessment. I don't know, it's the tagging rules. Understand how you can create your own, because that is much easier in the long run. You will continuously need to add these tagging rules for it. You should obviously understand how to read this report, figure out how to understand the content and how it would affect the migration journey. And obviously it would be really nice to go and say, this can be migrated, this cannot be migrated. But in general, I think with the Figaf tool, there's not really a problem with migrating all your integrations. There's obviously something from a technical perspective that you should be understanding. Does this make sense? Do you want to redesign this? What's actually the problem with these specific scenarios? And the thing is, with something like this, it may look good at the top level, but if you have not really looked into specific modules below it, you would not find out whether or not this is a problem. We talked about Excel processing, pivot tables is a good way, filters, columns, all these things would be useful for it. Okay, so now we're ready to start the migration. We have found an ICO that we want to migrate, and that is good. So that's obviously the goal. We want to figure out how to ensure these things that is going on. To migrate a scenario, you should obviously have a tool running. You should have an interface you want to migrate. There's this Figaf script collection that you should have. But I think it would also recommend that you would install this as a part of the guide and say, hey, this is not really running. And then we should be testing these things. So the Figaf script collection, search for Figaf, get the connector for operations, find copy, and then script selected. So there's a number of different steps here. There's this thing about select an ICO, select an operation map. We'll go through all of these different steps, but this is the important part. The thing is, once you click migrate, we will take this as a license that will cost, or as part of this step, you will be charged. When you're starting out with some of our trial versions, there is free migrations that you can use, and we do recommend that you use this to see, does this really make sense for you? If it does, super. If not, yeah, you don't need to pay. You can just use whatever process you have, and as we showed earlier, you can just add and say you have migrated this to this specific iFlow, making it easier to understand the differences. One important thing here is data for debugging. So there is a lot of different scenarios where, or we have learned through the time that I don't know how to say this, but customers have been working on integrations with a lot of different ways to solve their needs. That means that sometimes there is something that we're not able to support for one reason or another. And to resolve it and being able to work with this, we have created this thing. So whenever you press check, it will create this data for debugging. So that means if you have a problem with a scenario, that you want to say, okay, hey, this is actually not creating the right data that we want. There's some problems with it. You can use this data for debugging. Download this zip file, send it, create a ticket at figaf.com, send it, and then we can actually do troubleshooting on your specific scenario, migrate it, and then we can actually find out, okay, so what is it that's supposed to be doing. Some other thing is, when you're selecting this, we do have some different profiles that you can select. And this depends on what is it that you want to achieve. So we started out with a single process. I think this is ideal if you're doing synchronous scenarios, but the normal one I would normally recommend is the local processing. This would split the iFlow into multiple different scenarios, making it a little easier to monitor and understand what's going on. We also have a B2B scenario. This is if you're migrating to a B2B profile. Here you can only take one operation mapping at the time and add it to the flow. And then the last one, we also have a lot in pipeline that we'll also be showing. How do you actually set up the pipeline configuration for these things? And here we'll create all the artifacts needed to run this in a pipeline mode. An important part also is mapping of the communication channel. So we acknowledge that you have a lot of different scenarios that are using different types of adapters for different purposes. And in order for you to create the correct adapters, there is mappings of these things. So we do provide some sample ones, but you can also go in and create your own so it matches your specific needs. And this is obviously, for HTTP, it's probably not a big issue, but if you have file processing, it is really nice to have a template, because that means every time you're going to do a file processing, you can use this specific template and manage it. And this is really easy to create. And that means that you don't need to remember, okay, so I need to remember and set up the cloud connector, access, etc. in this scenario. We also have the sender-receiver interfaces where we can go in and filter saying whether or not we want to receive this message or not. And when we are migrating a lot of these scenarios, we do have the option to save specific resources in a way that makes it easy for you to reuse those scenarios. And that is something that, so we have, for instance, message mapping. The way we are working with this is we are adding them into the iFlows. But the problem is that at some point in time, you may consider, let's change this mapping. And if you've used this mapping in multiple different iFlows, it's really difficult to update. And what we are then going through is the Figaf tool will have this as a shared resource, and you can then go in and say, okay, I want to update all the different mappings with this. I want to update all the different places where this user-defined function is used, and this is what this shared resources use. You can also create it as local, and if you are, for instance, with script collections or function libraries, they can also be linked to the function libraries that already exist in the library. And I guess that's the next one. So there is some limitations on the different function libraries, what is possible, and that's why we started out with our own Groovy scripts, but you will probably end up with some kind of a mixture between these ones. And you need to figure out which of them make sense for the specific scenarios that you have. We in the Figaf tool have a problem with all values of a queue. In 50% of cases, I don't really think that people have figured out how to use and which of them, if they needed to select advanced or all values of a queue. So it may not be all that is really a problem for these things. Container is not in Groovy scripts. dynamic attributes is not in here, also over here. I think there's something about parameters is somewhat also excluded from, or is possible to use in the SAP's function library import, but that's some of the things that you need to figure out as you progress, which of them is the way you want to work with these scenarios. You also at the bottom have this migration log that gives you an overview of what is it that, what kind of steps and checks do we actually need to do for this to work. There's something about some of the supported things that we have here. The problem is I don't think this is really, we continuously update it. In general, I would recommend that you do check it out to see does it actually work for your specific scenario. I think in general we should support all of them. If not, let's have a conversation about how can we support this specific use case you have. And yeah, if we're comparing with SAPs, they used to have fixed templates. It's now changed. I think we generate some better looking iFlows, more easier to manage, simpler GMS settings, much more complex scenarios. And then we have this thing about adapter-specific XSLTs, and I'll try to create. Okay, so let's get started with a migration. So the first thing we want to do is we want to find something that we want to work on. And we will select this icon here. We can go in and select it here. It's this one. And we can say, oh, we need to create a package in our integration suite system. Let's see if we have access now. So we need a package, migration, and save. So now we have an iFlow or a package we can add stuff into. We should obviously not be in edit mode. Let's just show it. So we will go here to our package. We can select it now. And then we can give it invoice 11. And then we can see all the different profiles that's now supported. So if we select here single, we can press check, which will enable us to see what are all the objects involved in this, and we can then go in here and say preview. So this is the part of the process that will be created for this. We can see all the configuration that's going in here. I don't like that one so much. I would recommend that you use this one. So here we can then check and preview, and you can see the data for debugging here. So if we do the preview here, we can now see that it generates one local process per message processing, and this makes it easier for us to see where it is going, etc. Here we have these, so this sender channel is migrated to this specific scenario, and that's all good, at least for now. We could probably go in and create a specific XSLT channel that supports this specific use case we have, or whatever. Okay. Now we will go here and we will see that the archive, we can see here there's no shared object. That means that this has not been migrated correctly. Here we have user-defined functions, and if we had this already migrated with the SAP's migration tool, we would be able to see it inside of here and select the ones we want to use here. We'll just reuse shared artifacts here. So we can see all the different artifacts we have here. Here we can see here that it has this option, and this is because on local user-defined functions, they are in general added in a function library, or as a function library inside of the message map. That's can be a little challenging to work with, and we did find that there was a problem with, for instance, user-defined functions, imported archives, etc. So we added a way to extract it, and that means you can actually see it down here as this artifact here. here we can see that there was some of the things that were advice warnings that you would need to learn about. Okay, so there is something about check the usernames that they have been created for this. So we will do a check again. So whenever you do a change, you need to do a check, and then we can select migrate. It will say, hey, request a license updated, and I think now it would say it should be blocked. No, I didn't block it, maybe. Good. See. Or did I add it to the wrong package? Ah, so it is here. So we do have option here to open directly, and this is a lot easier to go with. And we obviously still need to check out all of these connector settings, what they are and how to deal with them. So here we can see the iFlow, all the different requirements that it has. And let me just, here in the Figaf tool, I would use this as the URL for it to make it easier to navigate between these ones. So we can see here this FTP channel. I think this has been set up to use the on-premise, and it should be an internet setting. It needs this SFTP or ERP user, so we need to create this. We can obviously create it with the standard tool, but in Figaf we also have an option to do that. So I'll just show what is possible. You can decide whether or not you want it. So here on the security artifact, we can go in and we can create this user credential. Let me just find this key value for it. So here we have this system DLP test SFTP, and I'll find it just a sec. So now I can just go in here and I can create this artifact. And so now we have created an artifact in the Integration Suite system for this specific one. And let's see what for the other communication channel we have here. What is it that it needs here? It is sending to our API management system. It has this ERP user. I don't think this is actually used or doing anything, but we just need to create it. User. So now we have created all of the different artifacts for it. One thing that's a good best practice is always to save it as a version, especially for these local processes where we have a lot of stuff going on. And obviously you should go check, is there any manual modification that you need to do on this. So we do try to set all the relevant structures as easy as possible, but there is limitations to what we can do. So we need to inform Figaf that there's a new version of this, and we can either do it from inside of here, press synchronize, or we could have gone through here and say, hey, let's synchronize it. I don't know if it will do duplicate synchronizations. But what we can see here is now Figaf have two versions of this. So we can check here versions compared, and we have multiple different ways to compare this iFlow. And we can see that there is some changes that have happened. And this is because when we have built our models, etc., sometimes SAP will change it and add new features in the processing, and we don't always have these things set up, and then it's a good idea to just use SAP's version for this. And then obviously next time it's easier to manage the integration and see what is actually going on here. So we can obviously also see here that it is all the externalized parameters. We can see there's not as many as on the SAP one. For this, we can see here references, the global one, script collector. And I just want to deploy this also. So this is just somewhere we have added to add simplifying the script collection for this specific scenario. Okay. At some point in time, I'll deploy it. Good. But that is actually everything you need to do to deploy a specific artifact. So one thing we obviously also forgot is we could go in and we can create a template for this thing. So we can say here demo file, and then the direction here will be a receiver. This is a file receiver, and the profile type. Sometimes that's important. And we can then have this, let's just find the name of this channel here. So if we are looking at, for instance, this DLP here. So we can select it here. And for a line like this, select it out here and then say OK. Then we need to find out the iFlow that we want to select here, and we'll select this one. We can select the channel where we should be using it. So we'll select this one and we'll generate a template. And then this would have all the different artifacts that we would need to use in. We can modify it if it's some different flow for it. We can see all the externalized parameter that is being created. And here we can see the externalized parameters, what they are. And we can go in and say, hey, we want to select the host name here, for instance. So we'll go here, we will find, so it is using this SFTP host. So then we can run the template, so run with this input and output. And then we can see down here that it does find this value. We can see it has been configured with these things, and we can go in and create specific requirements for this. I guess we don't really want to, so we could actually improve it, remove the location ID, because this is always going to be cloud. And then we just say file demo DLP, whatever that is. So now we have that as a template, and that means in here when we are migrating, we probably should be checking again. We have the option here to select this DLP test migration that will migrate it so it matches this, and we don't need to do modifications in it. Okay. So what have we covered? So we have covered this. We can see it has now been migrated to this specific ICO. We can see everything is going on. We can also, if we wanted to create this as a pipeline all process, we'll go in and select pipeline all. It will then do a check here. And we can then put in sender, receiver, interface. We have some different modes. Is this a P2P, multiple XSLTs, or single XSLTs? And then we can decide, hey, let's deploy it after this, and let's use our DLP test here. We can go in and we can change the names of these systems. As for HANA. And then we just say regenerate the names, and that means that in here, here we can see the XSLT that is being created. That is not really using those things, but I guess this is ERP, this is P invoice. Up here, at least here we'll have it, and you can decide whether or not you want to include this flow or not. The same down here, and that means every time you're doing a change, make sure it works. And here we are then didn't we change it? So we'll just check again. So now we can see some of these rules have been removed, and we can then select migrate. And this will then migrate all the different artifacts into the system, including creating all the different pipeline properties. So we can see we are creating the binary receiver interface determination. And that means if we're going back here to our migration package, yeah, this is okay. So here we can then see all the different artifacts that is being created, and if we look at, for instance, this message mapping or this receiving process, we can see it is created with the same flow. You may need to just go through and check would you need to have anything specific for these different scenarios. We have the message mapping and we have the ERP sending processing here that is somehow complaining about something. Request supply is not supported for this specific adapter, which I guess is a bit strange. Maybe it was because we created it with a different scenario. Then you'd need to make a modifications for it. Alright. Good. So that means now we have migrated two different. Oh, I guess you also needed to see that you have now this artifacts in the. And obviously, when you are looking at pipeline concept partner directory, we also have the partner directory into here in the Figaf tool that would enable you to see this specific change, update it, change it, do whatever you want with this specific case. So yes, this is just a little slower, and that could be a little of a problem. Let's see. Good. So that is all the needed thing to do a test on this scenario. The next thing we want to do, if we're coming back here to our slide set, is to test. And testing obviously important. The first thing you need in the testing is to get a lot of data from your PI system. Obviously start small and then build on top here. So there is obviously you need to have an agent configured. We do have some different modules that is in place, making some of the things a little easier. In general, I would say consider, yeah, we do have this agent model. I think in general, you should probably not consider it, but there could be some exception cases where you want it. You obviously have to synchronize, and you need to have an ICO that you can trigger that there is processed message on. So we do have four ways of collecting data. So the first is to use the data in the ICO logging, and this is, I think, the preferred way to do logging, because it is the least invasive one. You can either on the global level go in and set global logging setting, or you can go on a specific ICO, like ICO, and say, okay, we want to log this specific details. You also have the SAP log module. So if you have processing chain or something that's going on inside a module, it may be a good idea to add this to the tool to simplify the processing, getting the payload before specific conversions. We also have our own logging module that has some advantages that you can use yeah, and if you're on 731, 7.4 systems, it may also be a good way to fetch data on. And then we have this dual stack recording that works if you have classical scenarios. We did add this thing that you can add it as an option to fetch data on. Good. So to create a test case, there's a number of different steps that you would need to use here. There's something that you need to check. Send some test messages. Obviously, first time, do it in your dev system so you have an understanding about what is it that the tool's doing, what is it that you can do, and how can you work with these scenarios. One important thing, if you want to unbounded messages, they will create some problems when working. And one of the things that's important then is to have and add these expressions. It's XPath expression to find some unique ID. So that could be line item number, etc. Okay, so let's get started. We have our ICO here. We want to create some test data on it. And it doesn't matter which of them we look at here. So we can record. So we can either go in here, and here we can see what is it that is going on with it. Do we have all the details that's going on here? So because it's HTTP, we don't know what it is. So we can change it to sync here, and we have the save button down here. It's not ideal, but that's just the way it goes. And we can see here if it's using the global settings or not. If you go in and make changes to it, you need to synchronize it so Figaf have the latest version of an icon. But we can see here everything's good. We could also have gone in and add module to it. We consider this about third stage module. This is, so if we're doing synchronized recording, it would add module. One would be before you send the message received. Number 2 is the message sent to the target system. State number 3 is the response coming back, and number 4 is the part sending back to the requester. If you're doing async messages and is using, or exactly once messages and is using SOAP as receivers, you should skip this third stage module, because that can just cause some problems. So unless you really want the response coming back, I would just skip the third state module. You want the third step if you want to have extra data about it. We also have something about old polling process if you want to look at extra data, etc. So there are some different things here. We just need to make sure we saved it. We can also go under here, the recording configuration. So there is an option here, for instance, for message and partner. We can add an express XPath to type if we want to figure out, okay, so we have credit notes and invoices in the same flow. We cannot really see the difference. It would make sense to extract this. The same possibly with partners, and use that as a way to work with the data. And here we have the order expression. We will probably also need that in our flow to fetch data. This one is also interesting. If you, for instance, is using file content converter, you have this message log equal true that will enable you to fetch extra messages. And you have an option here that is called log JSON messages on REST channels. Then you will also get the JSON message after conversion. So those things would just give you some extra payload, enable you to expand the test case. Good. And then we have the number of messages we want to select for specific scenarios. Okay. So the general about is you go in here, you say you want to create a new test case. Test 1. We can select what we want to create, fetch future historic messages. So we'll just fetch the historic messages in the last 3 days to see if there's anything, and we can go in and override these expression partners if there is something that's important. Let's try. So we will now fetch 3 messages over the last 3 messages. So we'll select here pull messages, which will then go to our PI system, see if there is anything that's been processed. We can see there was something here that was processed, but no messages found. Okay, so let's try to send in a message on this iFlow here. So I'll just send a message here. 2. And right now we don't have any historic messages, which means we need to create a copy. We can add it to the existing test suite, but we would then need to now we can select specific messages. We'll just take these 2 and say, okay, that's fine. And then we'll delete this one because they would no longer be processed. So if we say here pull remote messages, if everything goes out right, we will then have these 2 messages. We can go in here and see what are the details, and if it, so sometimes we would find that there's messages that have certain criteria or it's not eligible for some reason or another. You can see it here, like we do not have the inbound message, or outbound message, or splitting is incorrect. That's obviously some of the things that could cause problems. Okay. So right now we have this thing, but one of the problems right now, if I go here and create test messages, so here we can see the details about all the different messages that has been created. And we can see we have an inbound message, we have an outbound message for partner. Actually, there's I would have expected that we would have received multiple different messages on this. So let's just try to send one again. But maybe the problem is that one of these is 1-to-1, and that one would not be processed correctly because it has a SOAP. So let's just see if we can pull it again. Okay. I would have expected we've received 3 messages, but there is sometimes a problem that the message is not fetched correctly. So one of the things we can do here is process messages. We can then go and we can see what's actually happening here if it's set up correctly. Obviously, you cannot go it. So we see here this one. Let's see what we have. So we have a number here that is waiting. And I think since this is exactly once in order, this is the part that is going to give us fewer messages than we originally expected to have. Maybe the queues is actually too big for this, or too many messages in the queues that is waiting to be processed. Okay. So one of the things that I would have expected was that we needed to go in here and say for one of these we needed to have here view edit payload. So this is on a line item level. We would need to use this ID as a criteria in our filtering path. So when we open here, we can go back here to the recording or request here and add the ID as one, and we also need to add it to our test configuration, so we are sure that it will also be added once we do testing. So we are not going to do testing on this landscape here. We can see the recording request here, it's going on here, the details, or the test suite. We can then go in here and say, okay, look at the details. We can calculate order numbers, and now we should be able to see that it would have 12 here as the order number, so that's good. Okay, so we can create the test case here for this. And now we have a test case with 1 incoming and 4 outgoing messages. Or 1 incoming and 2 outgoing messages 2 times. So that's good. That means we have a test case now. If we want to test it with the standard one, we will select the line, say migrate test case. What are the messages we want to migrate? Select migrate test case. We can add it to a test suite. You probably want to create a test suite for PI and one for CPI. So we'll call it CPI test or invoice. Because then it's a little easier, our integration suite. And we can see here, we are fetching this data. Where can we find it in our model? And here we can go in and say, okay, where is we find the other step? So we'll just select it here. Oh, that's the wrong one. So I guess it is. So if we have made changes to the model or something like that, then they may not appear here correctly, or maybe it's because this one was never sent correctly. So we'll see the details. We can go in and we can run it, which will then trigger this on the integration suite system. And here we will be able to see hopefully we see the message being processed here. So we can see, where is it? Here we have the test. We can go and check the results. We can see it's been sent. We can view the results. We can see that there's some errors with it. We can check the errors here, and it says here method not allowed. So there could be a number of different methods or reasons. Maybe we didn't deploy these specific iFlow. Let's see here on the tracked object. If we go here to the landscape overview, we can see that it is started. Here, open objects. Refused connection. There can also be that even though we're sending the message into this iFlow, we would run into that the message has been processed, but the receiving endpoint did not fetch the details. So sometimes we can open the polling request and see what is actually being processed here. No message is processed, and it says here logs were not found on this iFlow. Obviously, there could be some number of problems with this. One being that the iFlow is behaving really bad. The monitoring is not really working, so we cannot see if this iFlow has actually been triggered. Also, let's see. Okay, so I guess the trial demo is not really working as expected. Here we have done the same migration of an object, and we can then go and open the test cases here. We can process this test case, and this has a number of okay results on it. So this would then enable you to send in the message. And if we go here and we can click here on the execute on, that will show us where this actually has been triggered, which makes it easier to see specific details on it, and if it was processed or not. We can see now the message has been processed. I think one of the things we had here is that we had an item here that is something that always will be changed. If that was not the case, we could go in and process full comparison. And now I would expect we would have one error, and this one error is one thing that's the difference between what we run and what we would expect to have. So if we just want to ignore this, we go in and say ignore, and then we could go in and process the comparison again, and now it will be successful. Process full comparison, and then that's okay. So the other thing we can do when we have a test case is we have this option here and to update test case. So that could be, we may need to add a new element, we may need to add something. So once we have checked that that's the only problem, we just go in here and update this test case, and then we are targeting the next time we're running that this should be the resulting messages. So hopefully now this is successful, everything is run. So if you do this update, obviously run the message again, remove these extra conditions that you have added to make sure that they functions as you want them to do. Okay. Here we also have a pipeline concept. So if we want to migrate it, we select migrate test cases to it. We select our payloads, migrate data to an existing test suite. Here we can see we are using a new concept that's called chains, iFlow chains, that enable you to have one input flow and multiple different output flows. And here it has been set up that it will fetch in these two areas. We can say, okay, fetch it and run it with these criterias, and then everything should be processed as we would expect them to do. So this would, as we see in the monitor here, then result in a number of different messages being processed. So obviously we can also view this in the Figaf tool. So there is a way here, you can look here, open in Figaf message browser. Here you can see the filter on with these conditions, see how it's being processed, if there's errors, etc. This just makes it a little easier to understand. Did we fetch the right detail? Where are the error? And go into the specific iFlow and check the errors and see what they are. And now we can see it's also processed same error that we need to ignore here. This was because, yeah, a model had changed, so this would just be about update the test case and then run it again. So that would require us to just run the test case again, and then we will see the details. So because this this pipeline here has been created, we have created this object that is called iFlow chain, that we can add. We can add multiple different iFlows to it. So it knows all of these different iFlows. That's a part of it. If you want to create it from scratch, you go in here, you select here, create iFlow chain tests. You can select a sender flow for it and a receiver flow, multiple receiver flows. Now we have created a chain of this. Just save. You have all of the recording requests for it. If you go to your migration, you can then go in and say, okay, we want to migrate this to this, or you want to link it. So you select a line, select link iFlows. Here you have the chain. And here we should have this new one we created. We can add it. We can select migrate test cases, select the one we had before, and then we can go in to an existing test suite, say, okay, in this iFlow we want to fetch the details here. In this one we want to select this one here, and the last one we want to fetch the details in this one, or at this point, etc. So there's a lot of options for it. I don't think I want to do that. But that would be the way you will do it if you had not migrated a pipeline or something else with the Figaf tool that is more than just an input and an output field for these things. Okay, let's go back to the presentations. If there is something I missed on this, I think we are good. So testing the migrated iFlows, we have the chains that we covered. Normal test case, we do have mocking capabilities, and if you have a friend, let me just also switch the screen. So obviously, yeah, if you have mocking, and if you have recorded both input and output messages, that would be a way to handle such scenarios in. Then that would be possible to do with. So if you had a test case where you've recorded both before with third state locking and you needed mocking, it would be possible to set up and say where you want to fetch the details on. That was all I wanted to cover in this session, showing you how you can get started with the Figaf tool, how you can run DevOps, how you can manage all of these different artifacts, deployments, pipelines, all these things that is needed for you to manage a good integration landscape. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please, please share this with your team so you all have a coherent way of working on this migration journey, using this migration overview, using all the resources and tools in here. You can obviously decide whether you want to use specific scenarios for managing these things. It's up to you and about what makes most sense for the specific cases. So I hope you liked it. Please share it and then get started with the Figaf tool. Thank you.